Hello, ladies and gentlemen of my subscriber base. Today's video is going to be Jack Thompson's interview with Pat Campbell on The Pat Campbell Show. Now, Jack Thompson probably doesn't need much of an introduction if you've been watching my other videos, but Pat Campbell is a very conservative, right-wing talk show radio host who operates out of Oklahoma. That's going to be an LAC, as I call them. A long commentary. I'll let you figure out for yourself what LAC stands for. And the raw audio file of the interview was about 16 minutes long. So this is going to be broken up probably into 2 or 3 videos. Without any further ado, let's jump right in.
Joining me now is a good friend of mine, former attorney Jack Thompson.
Wait, what? Jack Thompson has a friend?
He hails from Coral Gables, Florida. And Jack has been on the program way too many times.
Well, you'll hear no disagreement from me on that front anyway.
For stories like this, going way back. And he started to see a common thread with these mass shootings, a toxic cocktail that I explained to you a few minutes ago that usually includes psychiatric drugs, an obsession with violent video games, and guns. Jack, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'm sorry to be here.
Oh, believe me, Jack. We're sorry, too. We're sorry, too.
In fact, I put an article up on Facebook yesterday out of the UK. Killer Adam Lanza, obsessed with violent video games.
Yeah, the tabloid press in the UK is probably not the best source of information. They're pretty infamous for blowing up any story that they think will get them attention. I'm not going to cover this one too much because somebody already did. The video, let me look it up a second. The video Tragedy and Video Game Violence on the channel Total Halibut by Total Biscuit. He covers it real well, so I'm not going to reiterate what he said. Just check out his video.
It's gotten to the point now where you can actually guess with pretty good accuracy in advance what games these kids were attached to.
I can personally recall no point at which I've heard of Jack Thompson accurately guessing what game a killer played. In fact, it seems like every time I've seen him in an interview, he's ranting about a new and different game that the shooter supposedly played. Now, with Connecticut, this example in particular, I highly doubt Jack Thompson would have guessed Dynasty Warriors as the game that the killer played, let alone that there was a connection.
Tell me what's going on here.
Well, what's going on and by the way, the leading expert in the world on this is Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who wrote a book on killing, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. He was a professor of the psychology of war at West Point. He was just on Fox and Friends for the second day in a row talking about this stuff. He pointed out that the common denominator in about 98% of these school shootings is that the perpetrator trained on video games.
Lieutenant Colonel Grossman is probably the best source that anti-video game people have. He actually did teach psychology. He's pretty well respected. And he's all around, he's done a lot of stuff, he's published numerous books, and he indeed does take a very anti-video game stance. I may address some of his views in a different video, but that's a little ways off. Now, as for 98% of shooters having trained on video games, first of all, I don't think there's any evidence that you can train with video games. But aside from that, the 98% figure he pulled straight out of his ass.
They have 2 effects. One is to suppress the inhibition to kill, which one could call desensitization. He pointed out, as someone that trains police and law enforcement officers, that this is necessary in training them to get them to be willing to pull the trigger, because if you're raised right, you're trained not to kill. So you have to desensitize, break down that inhibition in order that an officer might do his job. When you have kids who are unsupervised, and the purpose of the games is to kill as many people as possible, then you have that same suppression of the inhibition to kill in a civilian.
I find it very interesting that Jack Thompson just stated that gamers are not civilians, somehow. It was probably unintentional, but you could consider it a Freudian slip. So, his main argument here is that games can desensitize people, which leads to violence. Well, it is the finding of the APA, the American Psychological Association, that games can desensitize people to violence. I don't entirely agree with them. I think their methods of testing are rather weak, because it's hard to test violence and how desensitized you are to violence. Because, unless you actually have someone shoot somebody else, it's very hard to measure what sort of a change happened there. So it's really just an approximation. Because, how do you test for violence without having someone commit a violent act? But let's assume that games do, in fact, increase or decrease how sensitive you are to violence. They desensitize you. It does not follow that you will commit a violent act. It might be easier for you to pull the trigger, but it doesn't mean that you want to pull the trigger. If you're a sane human being, you still have to have a desire to do something to do it. You don't just do things because you're not sensitive to them. Like, you could be desensitized to eating. That doesn't mean that you just randomly eat. You still have to want to eat to do it.
Secondly, the games, as in the military and police setting, give you skills, scenarios, tactics, methodologies by which to kill and therefore become more efficient. So the other side of that desensitization coin is the efficiency impartation that the games give you.
This idea that games teach you how to kill by practicing scenarios is a very interesting one that Jack Thompson brings up a lot. My argument against it is that video games are so unrealistic. Like Max Payne 3, on normal difficulty, you can take something like 20 bullets and then just heal it all with a painkiller. Grand Theft Auto, you could easily take 20 shots. You could take a grenade to the head. RPG to the head, that is. You could get hit by a grenade and just fly across the room and survive and get right back up and keep fighting. The games are so unrealistic that any scenario in the game would not be approached in a realistic manner. If the games were truly realistic, you would only be able to take out a few people. You wouldn't go take out 100 people. You'd only be able to take one shot and you'd be out of the action. So because the games are so unrealistic, you don't end up approaching the situations in a realistic manner. Therefore, it doesn't actually help you prepare for real combat.
And it's even to the point that where we've had school shootings by kids who have trained on games that the military created at their Institute for Creative Technologies in Los Angeles, which the military, the DoD, then turned around and gave the video game industry to simply morph them, change them slightly into commercial games. So, that's incredible.
So he initially said that shooters had trained on games developed by the military. He then had to back off a little bit because that's not true, and said that they trained on games. Again, I doubt they can actually train on a video game, but he's claimed that they trained on games that were developed from games developed for the military with minor changes. The games he's talking about are games like Call of Duty, but I would argue that making a story-based mission with such outrageous enemies is not a small change. Making it so you can heal by standing behind a corner for a little while is not a small change. Making it so you can be a sponge for bullets and just soak up all sorts of shots, not a small change. So these are very significant changes from any games the military would use. There it would be one hit, you're out of the action, and you can't just heal by standing behind a corner for 10 seconds.
So when you have an event last week, as we had in Portland, Oregon, authored by Jake Roberts, 22, you had a kid who played these combat games apparently for many years. He shows up at that mall in a white hockey mask and authors his rampage commencing at the food court. Well, in the most violent video game franchise in the world and the most popular video game franchise, the Grand Theft Auto games, you can have a mission in which you buy a white hockey mask, go to a mall, and you author what's called a, quote, mall rampage commencing at the food court. Now, what are the odds that this gamer never played that game?
Now, this must be a mission that I'm not familiar with in the Grand Theft Auto series. I've played parts of Grand Theft Auto 2 and San Andreas. I've played all of Grand Theft Auto 4. It certainly didn't happen in GTA 4. But the white hockey mask thing is from a horror movie, originally, so he could have just seen the horror movie. Or he could have just wanted to obscure his identity, and that might be a way to do it. Now, as to why he followed this food court attack, well, he wanted to kill a lot of people because he was insane. Why are there a lot of people? At a mall. Where do they gather at the mall? At the food court. It's really pretty simple logic. It's very morbid to think about, but I mean, if you wanted to kill a bunch of people, you'd probably go to a mall.
And similarly, we have this Asperger syndrome person, Adam Lanza, obviously troubled, obviously someone who had just kind of fallen into isolation at the age of 20. He wasn't in college, he was at home.
Now, I don't know why Jack Thompson brought up the Asperger's syndrome, because that would not lead to violence. It's an autistic spectrum disorder, a mild one, the most mild one, actually. It doesn't make sense that it would lead to violence. It might lead to isolation. But he had deeper problems, clearly. And even Jack Thompson seems to acknowledge that when he says that he fell into isolation. He wasn't at college. He was living in his mom's house. It seems like even Jack knows that this kid was just messed up.
His mother was very much into guns, and we know now he played these violent combat games. Another red flag indicating the nexus between what he played and what he did is that he shows up in body armor. He's got a syndrome in which he's physically clumsy, and yet somehow he's able to pull off the second worst killing spree in the school killing spree in the history of the United States. Why? Because it wasn't the first time he did it.
No, Jack. He showed up in body armor because he's not a moron. He knew that someone would show up to stop him at some point. He has Asperger's syndrome. He's not an idiot. Most people with Asperger's are very smart, actually. It doesn't make him stupid. It's an autistic disorder. Now, in addition, why was he able to carry out the second best, well, don't use the word best, the second largest, highest body count school shooting in history? Because he was targeting elementary schoolers. He's targeting little kids. High schoolers can run faster. High schoolers know more about hiding. They know more about fighting back. That's why he targeted the most vulnerable people.
He practiced.
He's practiced this. He's rehearsed this ad nauseum.
Okay, there's so much stupid here, it's creating a black hole of stupid. Alright, this is going to have to take a second part and probably a third part, because this is too much for one video. Please rate, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Please comment on the video if you think there's anything I missed, or is anything you'd like to bring up in addition to what I said. And please share this video. There are a lot of people out there who aren't necessarily gamers, but who might buy into this type of thing. Especially more, I guess you'd call them soft-core gamers. People who are just casual gamers. They might buy into this a lot more than hardcore gamers would. So please share this video with people you know. And that's all I got for this part.